Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Raghav Chopra. I'm a Harvard Business School class of 2012 graduate and part of the programming committee. And we have all sorts of incredible and interesting speakers here at the club, but tonight is a real treat. So I was at an Economic Club of New York event, and what was most interesting there was not the speaker, but the person I met at the cocktail hour, and that was Ken Lipper. And Ken, just to let you know, is also gracious enough that he hosts a 30-person dinner even before the event. But I'll give a brief introduction and turn it over to him. The career arc of Ken Lipper, Harvard Law School graduate of 1965, can only be described as prolific and one with many acts across 6 decades in government, business, and filmmaking. Ken served under Mayor Ed Koch as New York City Deputy Mayor for Finance and Economic Development and as Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Commissioner. He is chairman of Lipper & Company, an investment bank and investment management company. Previously was a partner at Lehman Brothers and Salomon Brothers, an adjunct professor at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. He won an Academy Award in 1998 for producing the best documentary feature and is well known for writing and producing celebrated films such as Wall Street, City Hall, and Winter Guest. His newest project is a TV series on Alzheimer's disease given significant advances in longevity. Without further ado, Ken Lipper. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Raghav. It's great to see the young generation picking up, and I'm honored to be here, see all of you, many of whom I know, others I'm just meeting. I'm really honored that Harvard is giving me a chance to kind of explore myself, and it's very rare that you have to sit down and prepare something about yourself. I'm always so busy doing, I'm not really thinking about yesterday too much. And but this made me think about yesterday and was really exciting to kind of reflect literally for the first time in my life of the pathway that I would share with you tonight. And not to take up all the time, I'm going to try to read as quickly as I possibly can. I've eliminated a third just today so that we can have plenty of time for questions. And it all starts, when his father, is Jack Harris, was my boss. And this was in 1967. And his dad was the head of a big law firm called Fried Frank. I was there for about 9 months, and he was standing over my desk, and I didn't know what I had done really, and he said, "You're a smart guy, but you don't know anybody, and nobody knows you. Take this job with the government, and everybody will know you, and you will know everybody. In a few years, you'll come back here and be valuable to us." First of all, I had to get over my gasping that he was talking to me. and then I said, "I can't do that. My wife just started medical school in New York." "Oh, not your problem. Say yes, and the government will arrange a transfer to Georgetown Medical School." I listened carefully to Sam Harris, senior partner of Fried Frank, a major Wall Street law firm. I've been working there as an associate for about 9 months, and Sam was giving me a lesson that would inform my lifetime career. It echoed what my shoe salesman father repeatedly taught me as a child. If the shoe is not in the window, he said, it is less likely to sell. I accepted the government's offer and rose to Director of Industry Policy. That early advice, my willingness to move cities on short notice, and my acceptance of an untraditional job risk really jump-started my career. Leading the conscious life is the most important characteristic necessary to forge a successful career. You're never off stage, you're always on stage. I learned that naturally growing up. Your behavior, your insights, your qualities of honesty or dishonesty, reliability, imagination, all of those things, work ethic, are constantly under surveillance, even when you don't think so. It's a human characteristic to be forming opinions all of the time. And these stick with people, and you're subconsciously directing these silent evaluations. My early recognition I was always on stage and willingness to take a career risk in an unknown venture were critical for my success later on Wall Street, when I went back into government, in academia, in publishing, and Hollywood. I was always willing to give up the stable and what I knew to try the fresh and different. In assessing for this speech, I realized that I didn't have any fear of failure. Failure to me is yesterday's news, an invitation to get up, review briefly what went wrong, and move on to a new challenge. My underlying motto is audit, over, and next. And I've led my life that way, and it was apparent in working on this is how quickly I kind of would get up and say, I'll try a different thing, I'll try again, or whatever. After my first job at Lehman Brothers, I again found in thinking about this, I never applied for another job. All of my opportunities, conventional and unconventional, came in over the transom to me. People who knew me well in a professional context or through a brief working encounter independently approached me or recommended me to others as someone competent to fill their needs. I also never got a client through social events or social contacts. This is all came to me in working on this. I kind of evaluated how did this happen. And career ascent is heavily based on human interactions in professional contexts. Being physically present and interactive in the workplace was a major component of my own success. My workplace experience raises profound questions as to whether the 30% of the American workforce which chooses to work from home, mostly millennials and Gen Z, is dooming itself to a mediocre career outcome and foregoing the personal happiness which comes from an interactive human workplace experience. I was able to continually sharpen my intuitive skills, survival and interpersonal skills on the tough streets of the Bronx, where latchkey kids always hung out together in gangs until their parents came home from work. Adults and seniors are also spent most of their free time in the streets because the tenement apartments were too small, dark, and hot to stay in. For example, I lived with my parents and brother in a 600 square foot, one-bedroom apartment facing a courtyard and alleyway. I received no direct sunlight for the first 18 years that I lived in the South Bronx. Since I always was surrounded by people, however, of every age and character, I quickly acquired skills of assessing whether they were safe or dangerous, smart or stupid, friendly or to be kept at arm's length. But whatever my private assessment was, since I was continuously surrounded by the same people, I learned to get along with everyone. Some close and personal, others at a respectful distance. The most important career and personal lifetime lesson that I learned in the mean streets was how to quietly edit out bad people from my life. My well-honed ability to assess and get along with people was a critical skill in my being able to succeed in such diverse professional environments, which are dominated by radically different types of people. The same requirements for success exist on Wall Street, in Washington, and in Hollywood. The substance might change, but the path is the same, and the required things are the same. As an adult, I never again experienced such dense, continuous, and multifaceted street life. Nevertheless, I retained my South Bronx people skills, openness, flexibility, and confidence with all different kinds of people that I met throughout my life. My journey was described by my childhood neighbor and close friend, Al Pacino, in his 2024 autobiography, Sonny. In my little gang, in addition to me, Bruce, Speedy, and Cliffy, there were a few others. Jesus Diaz, Booby, Johnny Rivera, Smokey, Salty, and Kenny Lipper, who would one day go on to become Deputy Mayor of New York City under Ed Koch. I later did a film called City Hall, which I acted in with John Cusack. That was based on Kenny's experience. I'm going to just skip pages so we can have time for questions. It breaks my heart, but I'm a realist. At 14 years old, I got my working papers. I worked summers in mailrooms of big advertising agency in a dark warehouse lit by naked bulbs and with the continuous background sound of other workers chanting slave songs. As an extra selling ladies' shoes and a busboy in the Catskill Mountains, I learned how I didn't want to end up. As a dishwasher at Columbia College, I quickly grasped, with my precious room on campus and meals at stake, how I felt that day, whether my girlfriend kissed me at night or whether I preferred to be someplace else, didn't matter. The system mattered, and I had to do my little part to make it work. Rinse and repeat. I was off. Skip these. I was spending this afternoon writing skip. It breaks your heart, but these guys taught me to be ruthless. After 2 years in Washington, my wife decided that she would return to New York in order to finish her senior year at Albert Einstein. I informed the government I would finish up my assignment in about 6 to 9 months and then follow her to New York. A respected partner of an outside law firm that was visiting the government heard I was going to be leaving, and he asked me if I ever thought about going into investment banking. I replied that I only knew in general what investment bankers do because I didn't go to business school and therefore never thought about it as a profession. He casually volunteered, "You would be very good at that. Look into it." I investigated, learned about what they do, and that you could make real money there. I wrote 3 letters, and I ended up choosing Lehman Brothers. After interviews with numerous people in corporate finance, I had my final interview with senior partner Joe Thomas. He concluded with a vigorous handshake, saying, "You've already dried your tears. I like you. I hope you'll buy our act." I did. My South Bronx upbringing was yielding a surprising dividend. 3 years later, I was anointed as a general partner. How did that happen? I say all of this occurred to me, honestly, in preparing this. I hadn't really kind of followed the trajectory in a conscious way like this. I spent the first year learning the skills working on spreadsheets, writing extensive due diligence memoranda, and prospectuses for underwritings, and attending corporate client meetings as support staff for the partners. I worked all the time because my wife was busy at the hospital, and she was doing overnight shifts. Once I got my footing, I decided to spend late hours into the next morning at the firm. Not too different from the overnighters spent in the stacks at Widener. And I studied major insurance companies from the detailed public reports about their own investment accounts, which they must file with the state insurance commissioners. I was determined to come up with some kind of a novel, new client, new product. It was totally as simple as that. I said, I got to kind of break out of all this routine and show I can do other things. And what could I be good at? Well, I could be good with people, and I lit out to come up with something to talk to them about that was different from what they were doing. I identified that Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company, the 10th largest insurance company in the United States, was the lead national performer in private placements of high-yield debt securities with warrants attached. That was a voila moment for me because their returns were totally out of line with the lower returns of everybody else. The rest is history. I made a cold call after having sketched out a 4-sentence presentation, and I called up the secretary to the CEO, and I said, would you read this to Mr. Martin? And she said the magic words, I give Mr. Martin all of his messages. I gave her that, and the rest is really history. I got a call from Jim Martin. He told me if he'll send a helicopter to get me, would I come up to Springfield? Of course, I had never been on a helicopter, but I didn't hesitate for a second to say, oh, absolutely, yes, sir. And I went up there, and they ended up, after much bureaucratic concern and consideration of how to do this and all that, agreeing that they would follow my idea was to let the public participate in the private placements with warrants, which had those high returns, in exactly the same. So instead of taking, say, a $30 million portion of an issue, take $100 million and then sell that to your investors automatically in a parallel public fund. So you got 1/3, they would get 2/3 or whatever, in exactly the same thing with exactly the same return possibilities. Well, that became a new thing, and everybody was talking about how I was bringing, Wall Street to Main Street and giving the people a democratic shot at making money. Forbes magazine hailed my midnight oil idea as a financial innovation of the early 70s. Quote, when the investment history of the early 70s is written, the prize for useful originality could well go to that normally stodgy enterprise, a New England Mutual Life Insurance Company. As the 10th largest U.S. life insurance company, it has traditionally led its industry in portfolio yield. Its innovation, called Mass Mutual Corporate Investors, gets some of its novelties for being an investment vehicle open to outsiders, but sponsored by by a large mutual insurance company. But the larger part comes from the very expertise that made the parent company's portfolio yield outstanding, namely its skill in investing its own money in highly profitable private placements. So this was a real innovation of taking what was kind of a insider's kind of game and saying everybody will participate in it, and then Mass Mutual would get a fee on that. So they were getting safe, passive income, and it was a hugely lucrative product. Of course, that made tens of millions of dollars of fees for Lehman Brothers that was issuing these things and selling them and putting together the secondaries and all that kind of stuff. I was on the Wall Street map, especially where it mattered most, Lehman Brothers. Subsequently, I initiated the sale of Helena Rubinstein to Colgate-Palmolive. I was able to apply this knowledge to other companies. I went on the board of Neutrogena Corporation because I was not familiar with skincare. Suddenly, I was surprised when the Earl of Carrick, then chairman of British newsprint giant Bowater, visited my tiny shared office space purely by reputation to ask that I represent Bowater in selling several unrelated divisions bought by a preceding aggressive CEO. He opened the conversation by saying, Bowater is normally represented in America by Morgan Stanley, but my board decided that these dispositions, quote, require a young, smart, tough Jewish banker like you. That's why I'm here. He was really thinking that's the only reason I'm here. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I successfully completed the sales over the next 2 years and had Bowater as a loyal client throughout my career. In between deals that I initiated, I was servicing big house accounts. Goldman Sachs represented alongside me that we were co-managers, and Bob Rubin, who was then an associate, was my similar. He had the same role as I did, in our late 20s, and he became CEO and the Secretary of Treasury, and so it was a good run for us. And we collaboratively handled all the spin-offs and acquisitions by a large, aggressive conglomerate, Studebaker Worthington. It was one of the most active and lucrative accounts at Lehman and at Goldman, and it was headed by Darrell Ruttenberg, one of the smartest and fiercest people in the business. Completely unbeknown to me, Rutt called a senior partner of Lehman and said he would like to hire me away to be Studebaker Worthington's vice president of acquisitions. Herman Kahn responded defensively, you can't do that. Ken is going to be named a partner at the end of the year. Kahn quickly convened an emergency meeting of Lehman Brothers Executive Committee and told of his conversation. They agreed to name me to the partnership. Never before had a non-family member of 30 with a tenure of only 3 years been elected to the general partnership of Lehman Brothers. I was stunned when Herman called me to break the spectacular news. And then we're proceeding forward a bunch of years. Years later, I was working beside John Goodfriend, managing partner of Salomon Brothers, another tough and feared dude on Wall Street, on a tense, jointly run large common stock offering for troubled American Motors Corporation. At the successful conclusion of the AMC offering, John vigorously shook my hand and said, quote, if you're ever unhappy here, come over to the firm of the future and be my partner at Salomon Brothers. Years later, I strut across the giant Salomon trading floor where John sat at an exposed desk facing the traders, like a ship captain on the bridge, peering at the icebergs all around him. When I approached his desk, he jumped up with a big grin, saying, are you happy? I said no. He shook my hand vigorously, all the time maintaining his grin, and said simply, welcome, partner. Go into Billy's office and cut a deal. Billy Salomon was the senior partner and family member of the founding family of Salomon Brothers. Billy gave me a range of offers for percentage ownership and suggested that I take the lowest because he didn't want the lifers, quote, to resent me being the first outside partner to join the firm. I knew that I had a strong and unique corporate financing background skill to contribute to a powerful trading firm. Salomon at that time was not a major corporate finance firm. It was a huge and extremely good trading firm. So I replied to him, "Do you want me to be happiest? I will take the higher end of the range and work my way into acceptance by my partners." And that's where it landed. Lucky for me, because years later we sold Salomon Brothers at 2 times book value, and I became independently wealthy, free to assume my own destiny. Bowater followed me too. Salomon Brothers was my first big corporate client there. Literally out of nowhere in 1978, I was recommended to Martini and Rossi, owner of the legendary Vermouth and Asti Spumante brands, by a wonderful Italian banker at BCI, which is Banca Commerciale Italiana, with whom I had worked before. The owner of Martini, Count Teo Rossi, invited me to his chalet in San Moritz, Switzerland, to work. You can't imagine how big my eyes were, seeing this huge place in the mountains with deer running around. The whole back of it had glass with the deer hanging on this property. It was like startling to me. And he wanted me to work out a plan to protect his assets from a Communist Party takeover of the government in Italy. Former Prime Minister Aldo Moro had been kidnapped and murdered by the Red Brigades, and the Communist Party was only a few votes shy of control of Parliament at that time. This was around 1978. Since most of his profits came from overseas subsidiaries, and we could duplicate wineries and grapes in California in short order by just purchasing vineyards and things like that, the trick was to have all of the foreign subsidiaries not be owned in Italy, but taken out and put in his personal name, and then move them into trusts in Switzerland, so that if the communists seized the properties in Italy, is all they would get. They get wine presses, and they would get the control of the Italian market, but the majority of profits came from South America, from the United States, from other areas, because it was a worldwide brand. So we isolated that. We then encumbered it with a lot of cash that was given to Teo Rossi and his family personally, and he gave the banks his shares as collateral for all these Swiss assets. So Switzerland would never dream of giving those up if it was the Communist Party in Italy demanded it. And I told him that his only necessity was to keep a jet warm on the tarmac so he can get his ass out of Torino. Count Rossi recommended me to his friend Gianni Agnelli, principal owner and CEO of Fiat. I represented Gianni and Fiat for my entire career. He appointed me to the board of directors of Case New Holland Corporation, owner and manufacturer of such worldwide brands of revered agricultural and construction equipment as International Harvester, Ford Tractor, Fiat Tractor, Case New Holland. And I stayed on that board for my entire life until I was in my 70s. And Yelly taught me a valuable lesson in life with a gentle admonition one day when he thought I was being too rigid in my thinking. Quote, he said, "Remember, my dear Ken, in America, everything comes to the point of a complimentary angle, while in Italy, everything is a point on an ellipse." And that simple phrase has stuck with me my entire life when I'm kind of saying, "Oh, we don't do it that way." I'm thinking, what did Johnny say? Let's now turn to the government service and things like that I did after I left the business. In the city, during the 1960s and first half of the 70s, New York City dramatically expanded its current annual operating deficits, with the expansion of its services and awards of lavish pay raises to its 250,000 municipal workers. When its current annual operating expenses exceeded its tax revenues, it irresponsibly borrowed billions of dollars from the large banks to cover its inflating annual current account deficits. That's a no-no in finance because it never ends and you never have the money to pay it back. Independent financial credit agencies, Moody's and S&P, monitor creditworthiness, and when the annual operating deficits exceeded $13 billion, they declared that the city was insolvent and withdrew their credit ratings. The bank stopped lending to New York City in response, implicitly demanding repayment, an impossible short-term feat for the city to accomplish because it was running a deficit. New York City was officially declared in fiscal crisis at that time. David Rockefeller was CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, the biggest creditor and lender and leader of a broad banking coalition. He told Mayor Koch that he needed a deputy mayor from outside, whom financial markets and credit agencies would respect, and who could help him right-size the city. Only then could New York City regain its credit rating and access to financial markets. And no city, no government entity could survive without access, for long without access to financial markets. And we were being on life support by the federal government, the state government, but that was not a perpetual source of covering deficits. David suggested me. I knew zero about it. My relationship with David was forged at the Council on Foreign Relations, then as an appointed trustee of his family's wonderful charitable arm, Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Koch said, "I'm not going to accept some Richie in my administration." His political strategist, David Garth, told the mayor that I was really from the South Bronx. Koch responded, "You mean they think he's one of them, but he's really one of us?" It was totally Koch. Anyway, they called me to Gracie Mansion. I thought they wanted contributions. But when I went down there, the mayor just wanted to talk to me about coming aboard. He said, I need your, I told him, I said I'm not going to do it, and I would serve as a consultant. I didn't want to leave Salomon Brothers. You know, it was like an $80,000 a year job. And at that time, I was making millions of dollars a year at Salomon Brothers. And I said, I don't know you. And why don't we get to know each other? And anyway, a year later, I did join. I became deputy mayor with responsibility for the budget, taxes, and economic development. Koch was reluctant to concentrate so much power in one person. I told him I could not do the job without authority over all the levers which ultimately would determine the success of our mission to right the city and regain municipal autonomy. A reporter asked the mayor at our first press conference to introduce me if my appointment meant, in effect, that the banks were taking over the city. Mayor Koch bridled. He said, "Even an idiot knows if you don't pay the banks back, they won't loan you any more money." I knew then that we were partners. Regaining S&P and Moody's ratings sounds like a sort of technical feat, but underlying the nomenclature, it means closing or combining critical services such as police stations, firehouses, schools, freezing pay for municipal workers, increasing taxes, and those are the realities under those rubric of getting your ratings back. And all the while, we had to keep support coming in from the state and federal governments, which were reluctant, especially some of the Republicans. And Bob Dole was the head of the Senate Finance Committee. And I went down to see him to beg for money to pay for our police. We had no money to pay policemen, and we had already reduced it. to 21,000. And so I started telling him how great New York was and how it was a world city and so important and all this. And he stopped me. He said, Ken, I know this. He said, the people in Kansas don't. He said, let's not get into this. He said, our business comes down to an or an and. Where do you want, what paragraph of the budget do you want an or, an and in which sentence? And then he wrote, for a city of over 4 million, which can't pay police, the federal government will pay for the police force. And I said, oh no, we'll have a press conference for you and we'll all denounce this. He said, shh, this is just fine. He said it could be any city of 4 million. Of course, there weren't any other cities of 4 million. And he said, let's not publicize this. And there was like countless of counters like that where you had to really use your force of justice and personality. And it was a real lesson to learn how politics really works. It's, the idea that, and I've always thought that way now, in politics, it really does come down to an and or an or, and all these people who are, with all this lofty bullshit, don't get anything done. It doesn't really happen. It does come down to very technical, narrow legislation, not bluster. It would literally take a year-long and while trying to stem the tide of corporations, stem the losses in the city, we're trying to stop all these corporations from leaving. They were all moving to what we used to call exotic locations, like Georgia, North Carolina, whatever. And so we had to set up like a whole program to call on the CEOs and try to persuade them that we were really doing something about this and that they didn't have to move out, particularly all these back offices and stuff like that, which ordinary people work in, and you can't replace those jobs. It would literally take a year-long course at Harvard to explain the measures we succeeded in implementing and how we did it. But the downsizing worked, and we regained our credit ratings, market access, and the city's autonomy. Once the city was right-sized and stabilized on a continuing path, New York City rightfully blossomed again for decades. Some of us old guys might be called back soon. Let's focus on film. A few months after I left the government service, I received a phone call out of the blue, literally, from Oliver Stone's producer on Platoon. Someone who had worked for me years before in politics recommended me as the guy, as in I got the horse right here, can do, from Guys and Dolls. He told Oliver that I could navigate him through the business aspects, atmospherics, and characteristics of the players who populate both Wall Street and government for the film Wall Street, which Oliver wanted to do. Who could have fantasized at that time, only 12 years and 3 films later, I would be on the stage at the Dorothy Chandler Theater receiving my Academy Award as the originator and producer of the best feature-length documentary, The Last Days. Oliver and I met, and he told me about his story and the portrayal of Wall Street. I responded that I could not work with him on it because his depiction of Wall Street was hyperbolic and inconsistent with reality. I would be laughed out of New York, I said to him. Oliver slammed the door, and he left the house shouting, I don't need you. It's very Hollywood. But by 11 p.m., his producer invited me to set up a second meeting with the classic Hollywood line, Oliver really liked you. He wants you to write down how you see the story. I wrote 13 pages based on his characters and his storyline and a more nuanced depiction of them and their behaviors. We had an excellent collaborative dinner. Matter of fact, his his comment to me after was, about the restaurant. He thought it was too fancy or whatever. He said, "Next time I pick the place, motherfucker," so he can get control over me again. And it's a very director's thing to do, like to make sure you. While we worked on the script, Oliver suggested that I should write the novel. Each would feed the other. All he had ever, although I never have written a novel before, I grabbed the bait. Why not be bold, I thought. My deal with Ollie was that in return for helping him with the film, he would teach me how to make a film. I'm always thinking about tomorrow. That's what I really thought. I said, I'll put in the couple of years working for him and give up the money opportunities and stuff like that, but I want to come away knowing how to make my own films. And he agreed and was really good at making it happen. The arrangement worked well for both of us. Oliver got my full involvement, and I learned filmmaking from a master. I sat next to him behind the camera and attended all of the casting sessions, rehearsals, and meetings. He even let me pick out all the extras and things like that. Oh, will these guys be beefy or lean? Pick them out. And I loved working on the film Wall Street and was unconsciously driven to create my own original film while building my startup money management firm. My thought process was that my insider life experience could enlighten the public as to how the things which impact their daily lives actually work, perhaps lead to positive change. I religiously wrote 3 pages every weekend over the 3 years and created my next script and novel, City Hall. Before I wrote 1 page of City Hall, I read thousands of pages about the dilemmas of power. I studied the conflict between a leader sacrificing himself for the benefit of the state which he ruled. For example, Antigone, Hadrian's memoirs, King Lear, McCulloch's biography of President Truman, and The Power Broker. I basically wanted to show the whole notion of people knowing, like in Antigone, King Creon says, I know that I'm going to support the state and keep the state, but if I sentence my niece to death because she's a traitor, in order to hold up the concept of order, the fates, the old fates in Greek mythology, would punish me and I would die. And that's what happened. So I wanted to highlight that kind of dilemma in the modern mayoralty, how basically good people go into these things as well-intentioned and hopeful. But in order to get anything done in a democracy, you constantly have to compromise, and sometimes with unsavory people. The political boss wants this. You don't know if he's working with the mafia or not working with the mafia or whatever it is, whatever his constituency is like. You're just trying to get the bill passed. And so you give him a judge, and if the judge does something wrong, which is the theme of City Hall, and someone gets killed, then it comes right back to. So that was what Al Pacino's character was about, was a well-intentioned person who gets trapped in the circumstances that are automatically presented to him in a democracy in order to make it work. After doing that, all of my films, even the ones I didn't write or whatever, were based on my own personal feelings and experiences. And in the 90s, I had lost, in the first part of the 90s, I had lost my entire nuclear family. My parents died, my brother died, and my nephew died, all within 5 years. And so I was really kind of shaken. And so I basically got a script over the counter, a play over the transom from an agent in London that was written by a 23-year-old girl. And it was basically a tragedy of a mother and daughter having lost their spouses and how they have to adjust to that reality that they're never going to be married again in a small village that doesn't have men because they all drowned as fishermen. And it's how these people get through that realignment in their lives. So then I produced it first as a small play at the Almeida Theatre in London, which is sort of like, I don't know, Cherry Lane Theatre. And it was successful for 6 weeks as a dramatic play. And rather than take it to New York, I thought this would be a good film if we make a good film if we take it outdoors, and make the setting a beach, and have the same dilemma in a village that has those problems. And I got Emma Thompson's mother, who had been in the play. She's a wonderful actress on the stage. I went to Emma. I said, I need a star, because you need to get money. It has to be stars driven to get the studios. And so I went so Emma's mother was going to play the mother in the film. And I went to Emma and persuaded her this was a rare moment where she could work for 3 months with her mother in film. It was be her mother's first film, and really spend all that time with her mother and have that memory. And she kind of bought it, and she agreed to take a $150,000 salary if everybody else on the set, including me and everybody, didn't get more than $150,000. That would be the limit that you pay anybody. And then her mother gets equal billing in all publicity and photos and everything, which is easy to agree because she's a great actress. And so that's how we got Emma in there. If we had to go through the agents, after waking him up after a heart attack, telling him that a $6 million actress who just won the Academy Award for Sense and Sensibility was going to take $150,000, it just couldn't have happened. So sometimes you have to kind of avoid the system. It has to be carefully done because you don't want to antagonize these agents. But he accepted it as a fait accompli because Emma said, I want to work with my mother, which makes total sense. And so we did that film. It was a wonderful film. And I really got a chance to see a great actress. And her mother's a great actress, too. And they used to walk on the beach holding hands all the time whenever there was a break, And her mother, refused to go in when it rained because we were on the seaside. It was freezing, and it was raining all the time in Scotland and in the winter. And her mother was one of these hardy kind of people. And Emma, they used to walk down the driving rain when I was covered, and I was embarrassed, but not so that I didn't get into a tent. And they used to walk down holding hands. It was wonderful for both of them.
What's the name of the film?
The Winter Guest. It's a very good dramatic film, a small film. We only did it for about $7 million. And we got Film 4 to do it. It's an art film, but a really good film. And then I went on from there to make what I consider my most important film and the most meaningful film, The Last Days. It's grounded in Hitler's statement to his general staff, acknowledging that he might have lost the war, but he wouldn't surrender. Instead, he ordered an acceleration of his war against the Jews. In December 1945, Hitler lured the government of Allied Hungary into Berlin and arrested its officials because they protected their 525,000 Jewish citizens from the Nazis as a condition of joining the Axis. He put the Arrow Cross, Hungarian's local Nazi party, in charge under the butcher Adolf Eichmann. And by April 7th, when Hitler committed suicide, the Nazis had murdered the entire Jewish population of Hungary. It was a brutal mess. They didn't even have the weapons, the equipment, They drowned them in the Danube. They forced them to die on death marches in the snow in the winter. It was a terrible show that the ruthlessness of the whole system. The Last Days was my attempt to describe pure evil. Hitler and his followers were the devil incarnate on a murderous mission of blind hatred and destruction. No reason is the hardest concept for rational people to grasp and accept. That is the purpose of the Last Days, to warn a rational Western public to be aware of and defend itself against the irrational demonic, to accept that the devil does exist. By pure coincidence, and so much of my life is that way, is coincidence. By pure coincidence, Steven Spielberg, whom I did not know, invited me to his Universal Studio dining room for a Get Acquainted lunch, along with the chairman of Universal, Ron Meyer. Of course, I accepted. At lunch, Steven asked me what was I working on. When I explained The Last Days, he humbly inquired why I felt that Schindler's List did not already cover the subject adequately. I explained that his viewers saw a brilliant film. It acquainted tens of millions of people with the reality that the Nazis singled out Jews for slave labor. But Otto Schindler was somewhat of a humanized slaver. For example, you never saw Jewish children and naked women being gassed or burned en masse, enslaved Jewish workers as bags of diseased bones being tortured and mocked by sadists. I want to tell the story of the 6 million who didn't survive, in the voices of the few Jewish witnesses who did. Illustrate their stories with actual contemporaneous footage of the scenes they describe, which existed in German, American, and Russian archives. The Germans were scrupulous about recording all their atrocities. Their films was filled. It's like sadists are that way. You know, they like to look and relook and stare at their own evil. It's a reinforcing. The Last Days will bear witness for the murdered 6 million who cannot speak for themselves. When I talked to Stephen, I was just so impacted. Somehow I got into it, you know, and I was like really in it. And I was so passionate about it. He was shocked. He didn't say anything, but I was astonished when Steven Spielberg simply said, "I would love to work on that film." I had never even thought about it, frankly. I responded with astonished simplicity myself. "Welcome, partner." Ron Meyer, chairman of Universal, chimed in with comparable brevity. "If you guys really do it, Universal will release it." Possibly never before in Hollywood history had a feature film come together spontaneously in its entirety. 2 years later, The Last Days was finished and released by Steven's amazing team. And months later, I was on stage at the Dorothy Chandler Theater receiving my Academy Award for producing the Best Original Feature-Length Documentary. I hope I have succeeded in explaining the trajectory of my life. None of my achievements would have been possible if I did not have the good fortune and foresight to experience good health. For example, I currently practice yoga 5 times a week with an instructor and walk 3 to 5 miles per day, 4 days a week on the beach. And that is my only recommendation that I think is uniform. Thank you very much for sharing your time, and I'm available for as long as you want for any questions.